Let's start our journey into these special chapters. Imagine you've been reading a storybook your whole life, and you think you know every single word in it. But then, someone whispers a big secret. What if there are whole chapters and even entire books that were once part of that storybook, but are now missing? Books that tell wild, surprising stories about giants, secret plans, and even what Jesus was like as a little kid. Things you've never, ever heard in church. That's right. The Bible you have might not be the whole story. Close your eyes and allow yourself to rest as we explore the forgotten moments that might hold deeper secrets than we realize. This is today's bedtime story. Let's begin. Think about it like finding a secret drawer in a very old chest. You thought you'd looked everywhere, but suddenly there's a hidden spot with old letters and pictures you never knew existed. These forbidden chapters are kind of like that. For a very long time, people decided which books and chapters would go into the Bible that most people read today. They had their reasons, but because of those choices, some really interesting and sometimes super strange stories were left out. They're not completely gone. Smart people, like history detectives, have found copies of these old writings. Let's dive into the first forbidden chapter. This chapter talks about something truly wild. What if huge giants, bigger than any person you've ever seen, used to walk on Earth a long, long time ago? And what if these giants were born because angels, who came down from heaven, had babies with human women? It sounds like a made-up movie monster story, right? But this amazing tale is told in a very old book called the Book of Enoch, which many people believe was once part of the Bible. Now, you might be thinking, giants and angels having babies? That's crazy! Why haven't I ever heard this in church? Most of the Bibles you see today only mention giants in a very short part of the first book, Genesis. It says there were giants on the earth in those days, and then quickly moves on. It doesn't tell you how these giants came to be or what they did. But the Book of Enoch tells the whole big story. It explains that some angels, called watchers, saw human women and thought they were pretty. So these angels came down to earth, married these women, and had giant children. These giants were so huge and so hungry that they started eating everything, even people. They also caused a lot of trouble on earth. This forbidden book also tells us that these bad angels taught humans all sorts of wrong things. They taught them about weapons, about magic, about makeup, and even about special plants. These were not good things, and it made the earth a very bad place. This is why God decided to send the big flood in Noah's time, to clean up all the mess and get rid of the giants and the badness they brought. The Book of Enoch gives a much fuller picture of why the flood happened, not just that it happened. It's like finding a whole missing piece of a puzzle that explains everything. So why isn't this amazing book in most Bibles? That's a great question, and it's part of the secret we'll talk about later. For a long time, many early Christians and Jewish people read and liked the Book of Enoch. It helped them understand parts of the Bible that were confusing, like why there were giants. But over many, many years, people decided which books would be in the Bible and which would be out. The Book of Enoch was one of the books that didn't make the final cut for many groups. It might have been because its stories were so wild, or maybe because some of its ideas were a little different from other parts of the Bible. As we keep going in this video, we'll show you how the Bible you already have actually talks about these angels and giants, and how the forbidden book of Enoch fills in all the missing pieces, proving that this shocking story was once a very important part of what people believed. This chapter really changes how we think about the very beginning of the world and why things went so wrong before Noah's big flood. It opens up a whole new level of understanding about angels, demons, and the ancient world. Let's open another one of these forbidden chapters that might just blow your mind. What if the Bible you read actually tells you to look at another secret book to understand some amazing miracles, like the sun stopping in the sky, or super old stories about some of the first people on Earth? That's right, the Bible itself points to a book you probably don't have, a book called Jasher. Think about it like this. Imagine your favorite superhero comic book says, to find out what happened next, go read The Amazing Adventures of Captain Comet, issue number 7. You'd rush to find it, right? Well, the Bible does something similar. In the book of Joshua, it talks about a time when the sun and moon stood still so there would be more daylight for a battle. And then, right after telling this incredible story, it says, "Isn't this written in the book of Jasher?" Joshua 10:13. And then, later, in the book of 2 Samuel, it talks about a sad song King David sang. And again, it says, "It is written in the book of Jasher." 2 Samuel 1:18. So, if the Bible itself tells us to read this book of Jasher, why isn't it in most Bibles today? That's a super big question. It's like having a treasure map, but the first clue sends you to a treasure chest that isn't there anymore. The book of Jasher is a very old collection of stories. It retells many of the stories from the first few books of the Bible, but it adds lots of extra details. For example, it might tell you more about what Noah was like, or what happened to Abraham when he was a boy, or even more about that amazing day the sun stopped in the sky during Joshua's battle. It fills in the blanks and makes the stories feel even more real and exciting. People who study old books have found copies of this book of Jasher. It's not a make-believe book. It's a real, ancient text that was known to the people who wrote parts of the Bible. So it's not a forbidden book because it's evil, but more because it just wasn't put into the final collection of books that most churches agreed on for the Bible a very long time ago. It might have been because it was seen as more of a historical storybook than a book directly from God. Or maybe they already had enough stories about those times. There are some amazing extra stories found in Jasher itself, proving that this secret book holds incredible details about famous Bible events and people you've never heard before. It's like finding the missing pages from a super important diary, giving you a much bigger and more exciting picture of the ancient world the Bible talks about. This will truly change how you see those famous Bible stories. Let's dig into another secret chapter that might make you see Jesus in a surprising new way. What if Jesus, when he was a little kid, did some really amazing and sometimes even a little bit scary magic tricks and miracles? What if he wasn't just a quiet, gentle baby, but a powerful child who could do things like bring clay birds to life or even make people get sick if they were mean to him? This sounds like a wild cartoon, not a Bible story, right? But these kinds of tales are written in a very old book called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, which tells us stories about Jesus' childhood that aren't in your regular Bible. Now, you're probably asking, wait, what? Jesus did magic tricks as a kid? Why have I never, ever heard these stories in church? Most of the Bibles we read start Jesus' story when he's a baby in a manger, then jump to him being 12 years old in the temple, and then right to when he's a grown-up doing miracles. We don't hear anything about what happened in between those times, but the infancy Gospel of Thomas tries to fill in those missing years. It tells us stories of Jesus as a 5-year-old playing by a stream and making 12 clay birds. Then, when another boy tries to mess them up, Jesus just claps his hands and the clay birds fly away like real ones. That's a neat trick. But this book also has some parts that are a bit more surprising and even tough to hear. Like the time a boy bumped into Jesus while playing, and Jesus got angry and made the boy fall down and die. Or another time, a teacher tried to tell Jesus what to do, and Jesus just used his power to make the teacher fall over. After these things happened, Jesus would sometimes make the people alive again or fix them, but it shows a powerful side of Jesus, even as a child, that's very different from what we usually imagine. So, why isn't this book in our Bibles today? Well, many people who read it a long, long time ago thought these stories were a bit too wild or made Jesus seem too harsh as a child. They wanted stories that showed Jesus as only kind and loving, always. So, even though this book was popular for a while, it wasn't chosen to be part of the official Bible that most churches use. It might have been seen as a fun story, but not a holy one. Jesus' childhood powers and sometimes surprising actions is found in this ancient book that many people once read. It will make you think about Jesus' power and his childhood in a totally new and exciting way, showing you a side of him that's rarely talked about. Let's uncover another surprising secret from the Bible's hidden chapters. What if the Bible once had a super secret calendar given by angels that showed God's exact schedule for everything? And what if this calendar was totally different from the one we use today, even telling us specific times for hidden events and special rules no one talks about anymore? That's right. There's an old book called the Book of Jubilees that claims to have this special, secret calendar directly from angels. Now, you might be thinking, a secret calendar from angels? Why don't we use that today? Why isn't it in my Bible? We usually think of time as days, weeks, and months, just like our school calendar. But the Book of Jubilees says there's a perfect calendar that God gave, which has exactly 364 days. It always has the same number of days in each month and the same number of weeks in each year, making everything perfectly even. This is different from our calendar, which has 365 days and sometimes an extra day in February, and months with different numbers of days. This special angel calendar from Jubilees meant that holidays and special days would always fall on the same day of the week, year after year. It was a super organized way for God's people to keep track of his special times. This forbidden book doesn't just talk about a calendar. It also tells us many stories from the first 2 books of the Bible, Genesis and Exodus, but it adds lots of extra details and explains why certain things happened. For example, it might tell you more about the angels who helped keep an eye on things on earth. Or it gives more rules that God supposedly gave to people a long, long time ago. It even talks about how special covenants, like big promises, between God and people started on very specific dates on this angel calendar. It's like finding a super detailed diary from ancient times that explains everything. So, why isn't the Book of Jubilees in most Bibles today? Well, just like some of the other forbidden books, it was read and liked by many people a very long time ago, especially by a special group called the Essenes, who lived near the Dead Sea. They thought this calendar and these extra stories were very important. But over many, many years, church leaders decided which books would be put into the Bible that most people would read. The Book of Jubilees was not chosen for many Bibles, maybe because its calendar was different from others people used, or because it added so many extra details to stories that were already in the Bible. It might have been seen as too different or too specific for everyone. This forbidden Book of Jubilees describes this angel calendar and its secret schedule. Its unique ideas connect to the Bible you know, proving that this shocking claim about God's hidden timeline was once a very important belief for some of God's people. This will really make you think about how God keeps time and what His special plans for the world might truly be. Let's look at another very surprising story from a hidden chapter. What if one of Jesus' own close friends, someone named Peter, saw scary pictures of what hell was really like, with people being punished in terrible ways, and he also saw secret parts of heaven that nobody else talks about? This sounds like a dream or a super scary movie, right? But these amazing visions are written in a very old book called the Apocalypse of Peter, which some people believe was once part of the Bible. Now, you might be thinking, Peter saw hell? Why haven't I ever heard about this in church? We usually learn about heaven and hell from what Jesus says in the Gospels, which are mostly simple ideas. But the Apocalypse of Peter goes into super duper detail. It describes people hanging by their hair or their tongues or even their guts. It talks about a lake of fire where people are burned and big worms eating them and birds pecking out their eyes. It's truly, truly awful to read. And then it also talks about really beautiful and peaceful places in heaven where good people go. It describes shining fields and sweet-smelling flowers and people wearing bright clothes. It's like a secret tour of the afterlife, showing both the very bad and the very good places. This forbidden book was very popular a long, long time ago. Many early Christians read it and learned from it because it gave them clearer pictures of what might happen after they died. It helped them understand why it was so important to be good and to follow Jesus' rules. But later on, when people decided which books would go into the Bible that most churches read today, the Apocalypse of Peter was not chosen. Maybe it was because the pictures of hell were too scary or too detailed. Or maybe some of the ideas in it were a little different from other parts of the Bible. It was a tough choice, and so this amazing but wild book got left out. But even though it's not in most Bibles, it shows us how much people wondered about heaven and hell in olden times. It also shows us that there were many different ways people tried to describe these places. This book fills in a lot of blanks about what some early Christians thought the afterlife looked and felt like. It makes you think deeply about choices and what happens after life. The Apocalypse of Peter describes these shocking punishments in hell and the beautiful secrets of heaven. It proves that this amazing claim about Peter's visions is found in a real, ancient book. Learning about these deeper visions truly changes how we think about what comes after life and the very big choices we make every day. Let's explore one more surprising story from a chapter that's not in most Bibles. What if the very first people on earth, Adam and Eve, had to suffer a whole lot more after leaving the Garden of Eden than you've ever heard? What if their story includes angels testing them, Satan tricking them again, and them almost starving to death while trying to find food? This sounds like a brand new adventure story, not something from the beginning of the Bible, right? But these amazing details are written in a very old book called the Book of Adam and Eve, or sometimes the Life of Adam and Eve. Now, you might be thinking, Adam and Eve almost starved, and Satan came back to trick them. Why don't they teach this in Sunday school? The Bible we usually read tells us that after Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, God sent them out of the Garden of Eden, and then they had children like Cain and Abel. But it doesn't tell us much about what happened right after they left the garden. It's like skipping a whole part of their journey. The book of Adam and Eve fills in those missing parts. It tells us that Adam and Eve were super sad and scared when they left the garden. They didn't know how to find food, and they were very, very hungry. They tried to pray, and even angels came to talk to them. This forbidden book also tells us that Satan, the bad guy, didn't give up after tricking them with the fruit. He came back to try and trick them again and again. He would try to make them feel hopeless, or try to get Eve to sin once more. It shows how much Satan hated them and wanted them to be sad. It also tells about how Adam and Eve had to work very, very hard to survive, and how they learned to pray and ask God for help. It makes their story feel much more real and shows how difficult it was for them to live outside the beautiful garden. So, why isn't this book in most Bibles today? Just like the other forbidden books, people read it a long, long time ago and found it very interesting. It helped them imagine what life was like for Adam and Eve after their big mistake. But when church leaders chose which books would be in the final Bible, this book was not picked. Maybe it was because some of its ideas were a little different from other Bible teachings, or maybe it was seen as more of a story that people made up to imagine what happened, rather than a book directly from God. The book of Adam and Eve describes their difficult journey, Satan's trickery, and their prayers for survival. You'll see how this amazing book adds so many details to the Bible story you know. Learning about these deeper parts truly makes Adam and Eve's story feel much more real and shows us how tough it was for the very first people on earth. Let's open the very last forbidden chapter on our list today. And this one tries to answer a huge question about all the books we've talked about. What if the reason these wild, surprising, and sometimes scary books and chapters are missing from your Bible isn't just because they were too strange, but because powerful people, long ago, made big choices to leave them out on purpose. Maybe to make the Bible easier to understand or to control what people believed. That's right. The Bible as we know it wasn't just handed down perfectly. It was chosen by people. Now, you might be thinking, people chose what went into the Bible? I thought God just gave it to us. And that's a great question. For hundreds of years after Jesus lived, there were many different books and letters that Christians read. Some were about Jesus' childhood, some were extra stories about famous Bible heroes, and some were like the crazy visions we talked about. All these books were like different pieces of a very big puzzle. But over time, church leaders and wise thinkers started to talk and meet together. They had to decide which books were truly from God and which ones were just good stories that people made up. It was a very big job, almost like picking the best players for a super important team. They had lots of reasons for picking the books they did. Sometimes they looked to see if a book was written by one of Jesus's closest friends or by someone who knew them well. Sometimes they looked to see if a lot of churches everywhere were already reading and liking that book. And sometimes they looked to see if the book's ideas fit well with what most people believed about Jesus and God. If a book had ideas that were too different or too wild, or if it didn't seem to have been written by a true follower of Jesus, they often decided to leave it out. So, when we call these chapters forbidden, it doesn't always mean they were hidden in a dark cave or that people were not allowed to read them. It means that, over many years, these books were not chosen to be part of the official Bible that almost all churches agreed to use. It was a big decision that shaped how millions and millions of people understand God's story. It shows us that even the Bible has a history, and that people played a part in deciding what went in and what stayed out. There are real historical reasons why these secret chapters were left out of your Bible, and what these big decisions from long ago mean for how you read and understand God's Word today. Learning about these forbidden books helps us see the Bible in a much bigger, richer way, and it makes us think about why some stories get told and others remain hidden. All the books we talked about, you can find links to them in the description. Well, that's all for today's Secret Bible Stories. Next time, get ready for even more amazing stuff when we talk about shocking Bible verses pastors never preach about. Don't miss it.